Hello, and welcome to Radio Free Nintendo. This is episode 895, according to my research. I am your host, John Lindemann. James Jones is out on assignment. No, he's not. He's really on vacation somewhere. I don't even know what he's doing, actually. But with me, as always, Guillaume Vant.
Good evening.
And Greg Leahy.
Ahoy, hoy, everyone.
And we are actually going to dive right into new business. Greg, I'm assuming you want to talk some more about Zelda?
Sure, yeah, may as well. I suppose it's the kind of game of the moment, and I did a roll credits on it earlier this week, and I've had a bit of time to mop up. So it's not terribly long, you know. I mean, it's pretty ordinary length for one of these top-down type of games, you know. And it's just quite a lot. Been quite a lot of side quest stuff. I guess it did. I think it turned out I was mainlining it more than I thought I was. I think it's just one of those things where you've got, you know, classic kind of Zelda scenarios where you go to, you know, a particular part of the map and, you know, the people who live there have problems and you kind of solve them. And then I move on to the next part, you know, but once you solve those problems, there's actually quite a lot of side quests then kind of, become available. You know, like you have new kind of dialogue options that will trigger side quests, and I didn't do that many of those because I was too sort of like, okay, yep, that everything's solved here, I'm off. So yeah, I didn't feel like I was particularly rushing, but you know, maybe I was a little bit. But like I said, I've mopped up a fair few of those side quests now. It's not as if I wouldn't say he's like deluging you with side quests the way that, you know, kind of, Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild do, but it does make that kind of distinction explicit now as part of this kind of, you know, very much, you know, it's mostly a pretty orthodox top-down Zelda in a lot of ways. Obviously, you have the fact that you are playing as Zelda, you have the fact that you can summon all these things and kind of solve puzzles in a bunch of different ways, which certainly is, you know, somewhat unique unto itself, and it's somewhat inspired by, you know, things that have been in the last couple of 3D games, but also, you know, kind of the much more traditional dungeons and the way the, you know, kind of story plays out and everything in a much more linear fashion, even though, as I mentioned last week, there's a little bit of flexibility in terms of, okay, well, you might have a few different, like, problem areas and accompanying dungeons at once, so you could kind of pick which, you know, order you do those in, but it's limited compared to, you know, what we've seen with the console game. So it's pretty orthodox, but it wants to kind of get some of those kind of trappings and, you know, kind of appearances of Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild because they were so popular, right? Like we've talked about this plenty of times. They sold way more than other Zelda games ever have. So even if you've now got something that is kind of somewhat distinct from that, you know, certainly aesthetically and structurally in a lot of ways, they still want to kind of cloak it in, you know, some of those kinds of trappings. And so, yeah, the way it kind of delineates the quest, the way that you have things like the smoothies in this, like basically just like making your own potions almost instead of like, but it's kind of just like a simpler version of the cooking, which, I mean, it does seem a bit like unnecessary, superfluous, you know, because it's not that challenging. And, you know, I don't know whether, especially the way that you could just sort of, as we mentioned before, spawn a bed and lie down in it if you can find the spare moment. And even in battle, sometimes you could just, especially when you start being able to spawn more things at once, you could just spawn a bunch of nuisance enemies to keep people busy and just have a quick nap and get your health back up. And you get like better beds that recharge your health faster.
Yeah. I read a funny article that the bed is really what's OP in Echoes of Wisdom, because the first thing what the author said is, she said, yeah, the first thing I do when I encounter any puzzle is, can it be solved by bed?
Well, it's a really useful bridging kind of thing as well as it giving you health back. So certainly one of the beds that is going to probably be pretty near the top of that ridiculously long list that develops, as we mentioned last time. I mean, I think I didn't miss many kind of echoes as I went through the game. And then once you complete it, you actually get the opportunity to sort of review, and it will tell you, this is how many you haven't got, and they're in this parts of the world, kind of in each part of the world, this is how many you've got left. And it really wasn't very many. And now that I've been mopping up some of this side quest stuff, I think I'm down to like 3 that I don't have.
Yeah.
And of course that means that the list is just enormous. It's massive. It's really kind of ridiculous and unwieldy. So I feel like to some extent the ways in which I was solving things was probably a bit kind of narrowed by just like, can I solve it with something that's like within the first 10 items on the last use list?
Yeah.
So, every now and again, obviously something just absolutely begs for a particular thing or a particular type of thing at the very least, that you may just have to, do a different sorting or just scroll, really quite far looking for something. And they're definitely kind of, every now and again, there'll be things like they will put an item in the environment that's almost like, it doesn't mean that that's like, you don't need to spawn anything because it might only be a certain, like 1 or 2 of that thing. But it's basically telling you spawn this thing. Like that can help, it's definitely just giving you some silent kind of hints and prodding at times. But, a lot of the time you could do things other ways, especially when you get to the point where you can spawn more things. I mean, it isn't, as I was kind of maybe wondering when we left off last week, of like, okay, every time I do a dungeon, you get the ability to spawn one more thing. It's not quite that simple in terms of, you gain experience for your kind of spawning buddy try, not just from doing the dungeons, like the major rifts or whatever, but also from like smaller ones, which is another kind of incentive to do some of the side quests and stuff. So over time, like some of those levels that you gain, it'll be, oh, well, this particular kind of summon costs less now. Rather than just you can spawn more things outright, but it all adds up to, you can spawn a hell of a lot of stuff, which means, sometimes it's just something like, oh, well, I could just brute force this by using a ton of beds to make a very long bridge, or, I can spawn a ton of water blocks to make a big, float, so I can float across this thing or float up this way.
Yeah.
And, you probably end up having certain like go-to sort of cheesable kind of things. I mean, there was this bit quite near the end where it was like, okay, I'm going to climb a mountain. And I just did something that I've been doing like from quite early in the game, like, which is like if you spawn one of those spiders and then tether yourself to it. So it just kind of drags you up. And it just kept going and going and going. It's letting me do this. And it just like, I bypassed a whole like side scrolling section meant to be climbing the mountain because the spider just took me all the way up there. And so it's that stuff like that. It just is kind of cool. Even though I ended up going back and seeing what was actually in the mountain, what I was meant to have looked at. But it's kind of cool that you can do stuff, right? It's a little bit, it's narrower, being that it's top down and everything else, but it's a little bit of that feel of, Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, where it's like, well, yeah, you kind of ended up bypassing this whole thing, or you came at something a different way, or all that. It does retain some of that, which is, I think, is pretty nice. But at the same time, I tried not to just rely too much on the same things over and over again, because it's just not as fun, and I think I made efforts in that direction, but just the convenience of like, well, I have used this recently, so I don't have to scroll a huge amount. Definitely, there was just an inevitability of that having a big influence, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like it lets you cheese things just enough to make you feel clever. Like where I'm at right now, I haven't gotten too much further than I was, but I've opened up the second and third dungeons, and I'm going up into the one in the northeast right now. But it's the same thing. I mean, really, right from the start of the game, it's how many ways can I avoid this using the trampoline? So I can avoid spawning 3 different things, like the bed, the small table, and the big box. Like you're immediately kind of try to shortcut stuff. So yeah, it's funny because they have so many echoes in there, but I feel like almost the more they put in there, the less you want to deal with most of them.
Well, it does make it more and more unwieldy as it goes, just the sheer amount of them. But I mean, another thing, like with the side quest stuff is like they tend to give you like particular bits of equipment that'll give you like a buff, right? Which again, it's kind of like a streamlined version of things that you see in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And in this case, I think the streamline is particularly welcome because I mean, it's way too involved or convoluted or whatever you want to say, where it's like, okay, well, you've got to have done the great fairy quests and you've got to upgrade it like 3 times and have all the complete set to get the complete buff and all that. I mean,
and you gathered all the loot also that you needed, like the pieces of crafting or what have you to make the upgrades in the first place, and you needed money.
Yes, no, exactly. It's all of that. And I mean, so I would say they took it too far just in that case. But, for this kind of game, there's supposed to be, a bit more accessible, a bit more of a kind of quicker paced adventure and all that. It would have been silly. But, so you do have these things that give you different abilities and some of them might be like really specific kind of stuff. So it's like, okay, it lets me, swim in water longer before I need to find somewhere like bubbles to refill my, air meter or whatever. So like, well, you would only ever turn that on, at the expense of all the other things. Because as far as I can see, you can only have one on operating at a particular time. I haven't, if there's something out there that lets you have 2 at once, I haven't found it yet. But you would only have that on situationally. And there's other ones that are similar to that. Mm-hmm. But the one that's just supremely useful is you have a better jump. It's like a little frog thing. Cute little frog face, brooch or something, or a bracelet. I forget exactly what it is. And then, well, it like that, what John was saying just then about like the trampoline, it's kind of like just your built-in trampoline, right? Like, and it just skips so many bits of like, oh, well, I'd have to, spawn the little thing, to be able to jump onto this thing and then onto the next level of sort of like that is something that's really useful to have on. Essentially by default, that's the way I did it, so because it just streamlines exploration, especially in the overworld where it's kind of a bit less structured and it's just like, look, I just want to be able to peek around all these kinds of parts of the overworld as quickly, smoothly as possible. Mm-hmm. That was really kind of cool to have. I've completely forgotten what quest gave me that though. It was one of the earlier side quests I did because like I said some kind of fairly analogous quests I'm only kind of doing now, and it's like, oh, that's a nice item to have, but I'm basically done.
Yeah, I haven't come across that yet. But what I was thinking is it would have been nice if they would have added the ability to maybe make some, I guess you could call them macros, or if you could just kind of maybe have like 5 slots where you could construct something and just say, when I select this, I'm going to select these kinds of things. Like, I'm just thinking like, how many times early on in the game do you create effectively a stairway from these 3 items or something? And you just do that over and over and over again to the point where you're like, okay, once again, I have to put the bed down, then I have to put down this small table, then I have to put down the box, and it's like you just do it over and over and over to the point where you just wish you had some sort of
the auto build from Tears of the Kingdom, basically.
Yeah, I was going to say auto build is very much like maybe they just felt that's too kind of difficult or something, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that was going a bit too advanced for the kind of target player for this kind of game. I mean, I will say as it goes on, maybe that's less of an issue because like you get things like being able, well, you might not. That's the thing. I wish I could remember where I get that because maybe it's really easy to miss and I just didn't. But yeah, I hope they made that like a really obvious side quest because it's so bloody useful being able to jump higher. But yeah, I mean, the more stuff you get, the easier it is to kind of create stuff, I guess. But yeah, it's a fair point. I think it's the kind of thing that might have been quite handy. And I guess it's something, that I've seen, because there's one particular side quest type thing, where it's basically a series of challenges, timed challenges, and it's kind of there in a way you kind of see, like, it feels like it comes together a bit more almost, because the thing is there's so many because you've got so many different ways of attacking these things and whatnot, and this applies to puzzles, bosses, just general kind of going through, kill rooms. It could be a lot of different things, again, especially when there's this recency bias of like what items or what echoes of just things I've used relatively recently I don't have to look too hard to find. Like you'll have a solution, but it's not like an efficient one, but you don't really care that much because it's like, well, it's going to work. So let's just, let it play out. But then when you have like these challenges where it's timed, it's like, oh, no, you have to be efficient here. This is you have to, like, okay, if we've got a kill room and we've got a bunch of enemies and it might, like, some of them, they actually say, okay, you don't have any of the echoes that you have in the regular game. You have to actually learn them all within the challenge and then use them as you go. And then in other challenges, it's just like, okay, bring whatever you've got to the fight kind of thing. But some of those ones where you got to learn them on the fly, again, like for this particular challenge, it's really asking you, like, what is the efficient order to deploy these things? If you kill this enemy first and then you can learn it, that can then kill the other enemies way quicker than if you do it in another order. Then I felt like that really came together. That was like, okay, I feel like this is actually testing, how good are you at this whole sort of combat paradigm in a way that, a lot of the stuff in the game doesn't, because you don't have that time pressure.
Yeah. Like, how well do you really know your toolbox that you're dealing with here?
And I guess the thing about that is, it again, because it pairs everything back to that specific challenge, it's not unwieldy either. It's not like, oh, well, I've got to think about all the stuff I've accumulated over the entire game and what, it's kind of reining everything in and kind of making a very specific challenge. So I quite like that, and I kind of wish more of those challenges were like that, where, I mean, the other, like, kill roomy stuff and, like, boss rushes and stuff that they have in there is kind of still interesting as well, doing those things that you've done earlier, like under a time pressure. And, to some extent, there is an enjoyable element of thinking about, okay, I've got this, because I've come to this quite late. I could have come to it presumably quite a lot sooner. But because I've come to this late, I've got this vast toolkit for this stuff. So what can I come up with that's, what would be really quick? You know what I mean? I should have something that can make this really quick, because I've got damn near everything in the game to do this. Yeah. And that is quite satisfying in itself, not necessarily just in the context of those challenges, but when you have scenarios where it's like, you might have been pestered by enemies, and again, not because it's like, oh, I'm going to get a game over, but it's just like you have to avoid them or distract them or, for a while. And then you get something that just kills them. It's kryptonite for them. Like, I would think areas where you've got water and there's this thing that's basically just like a shark. And then once you kill the shark and learn it, you just drop the shark in and watch it kill everything. And it's
I just got that. I mean, even, and it's funny actually, to get that, I just kept deploying Octoroks over and over and over again. I would drop 3 of them, and then they would shoot that thing, and then I would drop 3 more, and they'd keep shooting it, and I just did that, and it took so long to do, I wasn't actually even sure if they were really doing damage. Like, it looked like they were, but I'm like, man, I'm really going through Octoroks at a crazy pace. But yeah, eventually I got that, and I was like, okay, I think this thing is going to basically solve any aquatic problems I have with any enemies from this point on.
It's already proven that it's tough, because, like you say, it took quite a long time to kill, and then once you kill it, and then once you learn it, then it's like, okay, well, now I get to turn the tables, and it is satisfying, that sort of stuff. I mean, like, and then you combine that with leveling up your sort of partner character and being able to spawn more things and therefore like multiple more powerful things. It's like, okay, you get those bits that are sort of referencing Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, where there's a bunch of enemies, and there's a treasure chest up on a platform that we talked about this last week that you can get if you kill all the enemies, right? And you might sometimes there's really quite a lot of them, and it might take a while to get. And then later on, I just come in there and spawn like 3 Wolfos, and it's like a bomb going off. They just go for everything so aggressively because some enemies kind of will attack once when you spawn it, and then they kind of faff about. They're like, what should I? And you might have to try and, do the lock-on thing to tell them to no, attack that thing, kind of prod them a little bit and all that, and it takes a while. And sometimes it's just quicker to respawn them rather than wait for their AI to figure out what's going on. But with those wolves, you just put them down and it's just like, they exterminate everything they can get their teeth into. It's brilliant.
Mm-hmm. So now that you've beat the game, is there a new game plus or anything?
Not that I've seen anything. I know there's hero mode, but I think that was selectable from the start. And that is interesting because it definitely limits health recovery modes and all that. So I don't know whether maybe that is where the whole smoothies thing would actually feel more pertinent to the game. I'm getting, maybe if that's how you're going to recover health is actually, because a lot of the things it's kind of its own rewards, stuff like this. I always say this, where okay, here's a little puzzle in the overworld or it's something to find, and it's a chest, and then you open it and it's like pumpkins, apples, whatever. And a lot of stuff I have no use for this. So I wonder perhaps, if you play hero mode, maybe that stuff that seems a bit superfluous, seems a bit just let's put on some of the clothing of Breath of the Wild here, actually comes into play more. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Maybe I'll try it one day, but at the moment I'm just kind of going through trying to find stuff like I said about those last few echoes, considering I'm so close. But I do have a weird amount of heart pieces and other stuff. A surprising amount of stuff that I haven't done there. So I don't know what's up with that. I feel like I've done a pretty good survey of the world. There's you've seen the stamp rally stuff,
yes.
Where you get I mean, this was something I feel like that was in Spirit Tracks, right? Where you get, you do as a stamp for a particular place. Whereas with this, it's a little bit different because it's just okay, every time you find one of these stamp stations, it progresses a particular card, and then you're going to get a reward if you fill up a card and all that. And this stamp rally guy that feels very pointedly not Tingle. He comes in from the sky and he's a weird guy and he gives you this weird exercise to do that's got weird drawings on it. It's surely he should be Tingle, but he is not Tingle. He's the stamp rally guy. So I don't know what's going on with that.
Yeah. So do you think that one of the last echoes that you have to get is going to be pull a Super Metroid where it's, one of the last things you find lets you see through walls or something like that?
Yeah.
It seems like it.
I really don't know. There was one region where I just had a relatively high number of them that I hadn't done. And I was like, what's up with that? I thought I really quite thoroughly explored that. But what it was actually was one of those monster encampments that I just mentioned. And they had I think multiple variations there. And I just guess I'd just never been there. And once I kind of did that, then I learned a bunch of them. And then that was really close to having them all now. I think one of them is in the last area of the game. And I'm kind of interested, how I kind of, I guess it's, they have that golden kind of, if it's obviously when you kill an enemy, it leaves behind a little thing. Right. So that's really blatant that if you, whether it's something you can learn. But with regular objects, I guess maybe sometimes, they're just there and they have that sheen to them that means you can copy them. So I don't know whether this is one of those somewhere that I, didn't see. But, I guess if it gets really, really fruitless looking around, then, I'll, probably just consult a guide or something. When it's that, there's so many of them, and then I'm down to, already I'm down to 3. I think it's probably something pretty kind of obscure, I would have thought. But yeah, just getting more of the, maybe finishing up the stamps and, seeing all, kind of all the parts of the overworld and all that. Cause that's really, I think the two things I've kind of enjoyed about it the most as a return to top-down Zelda after such a long time. And, in some ways you can look at it, obviously it was the Link's Awakening remake 5 years ago, but that was a remake. Then you had A Link Between Worlds, what was that, 11 years ago, which I enjoyed quite a lot, but obviously it's heavily based on A Link to the Past. With this, it feels more like Minish Cap in terms of like how original it is. In terms of like Minish Cap had a lot of basis on other Zeldas, right? Like the overworld was quite a lot like A Link to the Past, but it was modified. It had variations, and you had the whole, obviously the thing with the Minish, sort of gimmick, being able to shrink and having different areas and stuff like that. And it was also, of course, quite based on the Oracle games, because that was Flagship did those beforehand and all that. So it was, and then the aesthetic had a lot of Wind Waker influences. So it was all these different kind of elements mixed together, but it felt like its own, to a fair degree. And this is largely like that. I mean, it's kind of nice to see a lot of Zelda staples, like different, like the Zoras and all that kind of stuff brought to life with this aesthetic from the Link's Awakening remake. Because of course, Link's Awakening is that oddball game that has like, Mario enemies, but it doesn't have quite a lot of Zelda staples in it because it's, a dream and on an island and all the rest of it. So it's nice to see all those things aesthetically brought together, but also just, the familiarity of, these kinds of, linear dungeons, even though, yes, they have, this aspect of, multiple ways to solve puzzles, which certainly helps avoid some, and kind of talked about this pre-release, helps avoid some of that kind of crushing, inevitability around the dungeons in A Link Between Worlds, where it's like, well, you literally have to have one item to be in this dungeon. And you may only have that because of this whole rental system and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like, you're getting dungeons here where it's got that, familiar, comforting structure, but with just enough like ambiguity to kind of really enjoy it. And so, and again, like just different combinations, isn't it? Because it's not just the things you could spawn, but it's that ability to like grab them and, let them take you where they're going, or for you to bring them where you're going. And all the combinations that affords. I mean, one of the challenges I mentioned earlier was, you've got to get rid of all the Gibdos. Like there's just this room full of Gibdos and you've got to get rid of them, right? And, it revolves around these sort of, things that you can copy, which are just like giant fans for blowing. It's like mostly for blowing like sand mounds down. But the point of the challenge is, create them so that they will blow the Gibdos into this pit in the middle of the room, right? And so, I've done this and I've got one left. And it's like, God, this is getting tight. I don't know whether I'm going to finish it in time. I don't know whether I can get over to the other end of the room and put another fan down and blow him this way and then that way. And then it dawned on me, I could just grab him and dump him in there myself. And it worked. It was just like, no, you're the last one. Here you go. In you go. Job done. It's, sometimes I would forget, like the most direct thing you could do, which is just grab the thing in question and do whatever you want with it. So I kind of, the number of possibilities sometimes maybe, makes it seem more kind of, seem more complicated or more kind of open than it actually is. But, some of that illusion like works on you, it feels more like you've solved something, like you said, kind of makes you feel clever, however clever you're actually being. So that's good. And I would also say the bosses, while yes, there's lots of ways, there's probably lots of cheesable things you can do. There's, kind of being able to find a window to sneak a nap in to heal yourself. But they've got a little bit of bite to them. You know, I can think of quite a lot of Zelda games where bosses are just so easy and they might look cool on occasion, but, you know, they lack in substance. These are generally pretty good, I think, you know, pretty interesting and just have a bit more, you know, kind of in terms of like phases or just, you know, kind of things to think about. You know, I think they are actually quite satisfying, which I was, you know, given how kind of easygoing, a lot of the game is, I wasn't necessarily expecting that. So maybe that's part of it, right? Is expectations.
Yeah, I mean, right out of the gate, I mean, I've only fought the one boss so far, but I was kind of caught off guard that I would have to actually spawn a couple of different things to get the job done, because you have to hit him on the bottom and then you have to hit him up top, and of course you can't really use the same thing to do that, so I was spawning the moblins that throw the spears, and so like you have to actually think. They do actually right from the start make you use quite a bit of things from your toolbox to fight the bosses. It's not just like, okay, here's the one major thing you just got that you use all the time, and you can use that on the boss and you're totally fine, and it just overrides everything the boss does. That's kind of what I was expecting.
And that is something, you know, you go back, but plenty of 3D Zeldas or top-down Zeldas where it's like, you know, the item you got earlier on in this dungeon might be quite involved in beating the boss, mightn't it? You know, so
yeah,
it does. Yeah. It does feel, maybe not to like a massive extent, but it does feel like it kind of mitigates that, you know, this kind of structure, and just it feels more kind of, again, just a little more open, little more kind of ambiguous, and more satisfying as a result. The only thing that kind of that felt like, I don't know exactly what their intentions were with that particularly shows up in the boss scenario, is their whole, like, when you can go into the sword fighter mode and basically, you know, become Link, right? So, and that doesn't just mean you can wield the sword, because you can unlock more of his kind of toolkit as the game goes on. And in particular, the bow and arrow, right? That is a really useful thing to be able to have when you turn into Link, because sometimes when you're trying to, you know, kind of do a particular kill room, or it might be during a boss and you're trying to like take out nuisance enemies, a lot of the time it's flying ones that are the biggest nuisances, right? Because you might have a certain amount of enemy like echoes that can also fly, but again, they're not always the most efficient. You know, they kind of they might be like trying to attack other stuff, or it's kind of slow. So it's a big, like, temptation to want to turn into Link and just stick an arrow in it, and it's done, you know, kind of move on from there. But, the way they kind of, handle that is you have this, you know, sort of, meter that you're building up over time. Is another thing that you find, you know, doodads that will eventually help you expand the meter, and, you know, you make the sword better and other bits of his kit sort of better. And that's all well and good. It's another thing to find out there, and this certainly, you know, feels more rewarded than, you know, getting another bunch of pumpkins or whatever. So that's fair enough. But the thing about it is that every time that you want to activate Link mode, as it were, you have like the little and it stops, and then you go, and it's just, I mean, even if you haven't got the sound on, it can get a bit grated just because everything stops when that, you know what I mean? Like the action, it's not just like you activate that and the action goes on uninterrupted. You have to play the fanfare, everything stops, and then you become that, and now you've got to do stuff. And it's just like, well, I don't know if that was expressly with the intent of making you want to do it less, so you wouldn't rely on it that much. But if it was, I don't think they needed to do that, because it's already a meter. It's already like on a timer, and a timer that's not that generous at first. Like you really can't be Link for that long, right? So I don't know exactly what the idea was there, but it just ends up being this kind of friction that makes you want to like not use it. Which there's just certain, and a lot of the time it's just, that's fine. Like, just don't use it, right? Because you've got all this other stuff in your toolkit. Like, do you really need to? A lot of the time, not so much. But with the bosses, it is much more a case of like, okay, the classic Zelda boss kind of style. they have a kind of phase where you've got to damage something or do something that then renders them helpless. And it's time to get your licks in, right? It's time to get the damage in while they're lying there, unable to defend themselves. And that's when you want to be Link, right? Is that at that particular moment, you want to be Link and just get in there and get your damage in.
It's a way to do more direct attacks, right? Like that's like kind of, it's almost like a shortcut. Like, okay, well now I can specifically attack this specific thing exactly how I want.
Yes, exactly. And it's just like sometimes there's one particular fight I can think of where it's just like, rather than it being like a very occasional thing in terms of like, okay, you gotta hit the weak spot and then it happens. It's more of the thing where it's a back and forth in the fight. Like you keep wanting to kind of do, damage and then, all right, get out of it. And then, all right, let's do damage again. It's more kind of granular. And that's where it just kind of felt like this is, materially affecting my kind of desire to to kind of actually fight the boss this way, because I don't want to activate the every time. I question that decision, but I assume it has something to do with like not wanting it to be too much of a crutch, right? Because the whole point of the game, to a fair extent, is doing things in different ways, doing things your own way, as the marketing kind of has proclaimed, I think, on some of the like release date videos and stuff. So it's like I do get it to a certain extent, but I think that's just a little bit clunky. But it's one of the only really outright kind of criticisms I would have. I think mostly, I mean, my expectations weren't super high going into it, because you kind of know it's, it's not the most high sort of priority Zelda project out there. I don't know. I wouldn't quite equate it with something like Super Mario Brothers Wonder, where, you hadn't had a side scrolling Mario in so many years. And it's kind of like, this is, to a fair degree, like the A team doing it. So I was a little bit more modest coming in, but they've still, I think they've done a good job of kind of living up to the still quite high expectations I had, and just satisfying the desire to play a Zelda game of this sort for that feels relatively fresh for the first time in a long time. So I think it'd be interesting to see how much different everyone else's experiences are, because by the nature of it, it's kind of a bit more variable than other kind of top-down Zeldas have been in the past. And it'd be interesting to see just how different those experiences are. But I'd be surprised if, a lot of people didn't get some enjoyment out of this, because it's very cute, very charming, very pleasant soundtrack and all that. It just doesn't really put too many kind of feet wrong, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's not really too much here that could, throw somebody or confuse them, really. I'm gonna keep playing through it. I'm just gonna, I've been sucked into some other stuff, and Diablo 4, their new expansion's coming out, but I'll keep plugging away at it. Guillaume, what do you have for new business, if anything?
Yeah, it's pretty slim pickings. I haven't really played much new. I just I'm still, I don't know. Karen and I are still playing Double Dragon Gaiden. We finished the story mode a long time ago, but there is a survival mode that's actually pretty good. And Karen is loving the game, so we just keep playing. She's actually better than me at it, because she sticks with like these two characters that really work well for her, and like she uses what works, and I've been trying to like mix it up and changing, like trying different combinations of characters, and so I'm not really I'm a master of none kind of in the master of none kind of situation, and so sometimes, like several times in the last few games that we played, she just would have to finish the segment for us so that I could hop back in, and so that we could continue playing together, because every stage in the survival mode, like eventually you kill all the enemies in the wave, and then you get to the screen where you're going to switch to the next level, and you pick an upgrade from the selection that they give you, and so in that moment, like the other player who died can revive themselves. Anyway,
So when you died and she carried you to victory, was she making fun of you, emasculating you?
Oh, no,
was there any
no.
of that going on?
No.
Too bad.
She put up with my whining. I was just like, I died again. I hate this game. It was just.
So you were being the Rob Schneider for the when he's in, was it Judge Dredd? The guy on the back of the bike just go Dredd. that was you, right, in this scenario.
Wow, that's really unflattering, but sure.
Sorry,
I was asking if you were properly emasculated, so I'm not flattering you over here.
No,
I saw it was another film where he played. It's the exact same part that I saw just recently with Jean-Claude Van Damme called Knockoff, and again it's another Sterling Schneider performance. What can I say? It's like, it was in my head for that reason mostly, not because it's eerily reminiscent of the situation you're describing. Don't worry.
But yeah, I guess I don't have anything really specific to say about Double Dragon Gaiden, except did I mention last time that like every time that we would finish the like the story mode or the survival mode, a screen would come up that would say like, oh, like there was a problem uploading your score to the leaderboards, and so I guess I didn't mention that. Like I just assumed after a certain point, okay, like the leaderboards must be down. This game must have been like an abysmal failure. And so they just took down the leaderboards because they don't want to pay for to keep them up. I don't know. But then I went and I checked. Like I was like, okay, well I can check the leaderboards. I went to see, and I did have a little bit of trouble connecting to them. But once I did, I saw that they only kept the top 50 scores. Worldwide, I guess, for the Switch version, and it was like 5, 6, 7, 8 times more than the scores that we could get. So I think that the fact that the game was all like, oh yeah, I can't connect to the leaderboards, it was maybe to try to protect our feelings or something. Or it was like, yeah, I'm not bothering to even try to upload this puny score. Like it's not going to appear in the top 50. Forget about it.
Leaderboard servers are always funny to me because I just sit there and I'm like, why do they put them into games when they're just effectively born to die? Because eventually, I don't know, like a lot of this stuff, and it's just, I don't know.
Well,
it's kind of a gripe I have. It's
the ones that can be fun is are the ones that keep more than 50 top scores.
Yeah.
And that will
that's
have
great.
like your maybe like your friends list on it, and then you see that the 2 or 3 other people who might have played a particular game, you can see how you stack up against them.
It's just some sort of context is really kind of important, unless you are fortunate enough, I guess, or just skilled enough to be really that close to the top, to be in a top 50 or something. You need some other sort of context. So yeah, friends list is one thing, but then, it needs to be something that other people are playing in some sort of numbers, to kind of make that work a lot of the time. So I think really, it's kind of like, Pikmin, I can think of things have had this where you get the distribution chart, right? Of just like, or I think maybe Mario Kart time trials have had stuff like this as well. It's just like, let me see where I am on the curve, basically. You know what I mean? Like, whether I'm in top 50, 100,000, like the numbers without context, just like, But if I could see, proportionally, am I in the top whatever percent or something? And, how much better can you kind of make that? I think also maybe, Mario Maker 2 had like where they would have these time trial challenges, and you could see where your best time fit across that whole curve, and they had like sort of gold. I think they had made something like gold, silver, bronze achievement for like being in whatever the top whatever percentile. Stuff like that, could really help, like, make those things more compelling. When it's just there and it's just for the people at the very, very top, it's, I guess it's fine for them, but by definition, not a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was also, at least one of the maybe all of them, but anyway, at least one of the Pac-Man Championship Edition games, you could see, like, you could look at videos of, the play, the how do you call that? The play sequence, the play, I don't know, of the game, basically, of the people at the top of the leaderboards for in any given stage. And so that could help you, come up with strategies, maybe like, oh, like if I tackle this maze this way instead, like apparently you can make so many points just chomping ghosts at the end. So that can be really, really useful. And that was how, I made a lot of progress when I was playing it actively. Like I would actually go and look at like, okay, how do the pros do it? And then I would try to not mess up and do the same thing that they did. And usually I would mess up, but like I definitely got closer to, I would better my score a lot by just like following what the best we're doing. So it was pretty cool. But yeah, so Double Dragon, other than that, I tried very briefly. It's been a while. Like for a while I've been wanting to get back into Dragon Quest XI before Dragon Quest III Remake came out, because it's been years since I played it, and I just remember something about the ending kind of like tying into Dragon Quest III in some way. The ending of, I'm sorry for spoiling this, but the ending of Dragon Quest XI, like the true ending. I don't remember exactly how, like the context of how they tie together. So I was like, well, instead of just watching the ending on YouTube and maybe not getting the entire context still, maybe I could just replay it and replay it in 2D mode. Because when you play in the 2D mode, because I don't know if I have to go over this, but Dragon Quest XI came out originally on PlayStation 4. It was like this full 3D, lush, big RPG game. And also, Square Enix had been working on the 3DS version of Dragon Quest XI for a long time, and they kind of released those. Was it at the same time, or did one come out after the other? No, that's something I guess I should have checked. But
I think they were at the same time.
Yeah, that would have been my guess, but I'm not sure of it.
Right, yeah. Because the Wii U was not for a long time, Enix, their tactic was to release their flagship series, Dragon Quest, on the system that had the biggest user base, at least in Japan. But usually that turned out to be the system with the biggest user base worldwide. And, controversially, I guess, when the DS, when a handheld became the top selling, hardware for, around that generation of systems, like the Dragon Quest series made the switch to, the handhelds, to the DS. And then the 3DS was very popular, but then the Wii U did not have that popularity. And so, and I guess there was still like a desire to kind of push the envelope in terms of graphics and technology and all of that. So, so it came out on both. Like there was a kind of there was like the game on the 3DS was 3D, but there was also like a 2D map on. I don't exactly know how it went, but there was like a whole like 2D 3D thing on the 3DS game, in the 3DS game. And the PlayStation version did not have that. But when the game came to the Switch, it was like the definitive edition or whatever. And they added the 2D mode to that version. But when you play the game in 2D, it's not just that the maps become 2D. Like, they're different maps, essentially, because there's no way that you could reproduce the 3D worlds of the 3D version of Dragon Quest XI in 2D. So they're different maps. They're often shorter. like the dungeons are going to be less complex to explore necessarily because there's just there are fewer branches or fewer paths that crisscross or go up and down or what have you. The game is just simpler in 2D, so it is going to be faster. The cutscenes are often much shorter because they're not voice acted in 2D. They're just usually like text box based and very crude animations of like you make the sprite jump in place to express surprise or whatever. Like it's much less sophisticated than like the whole animated bit of someone being surprised and whatever the scene requires. So I thought maybe I want to play in 2D mode. But I tried it for maybe an hour, and I'm really not feeling it. I look ahead, even though like playing it in 2D would be shorter. My playthrough of the game in 3D was like over 100 hours, like probably 120 hours. It was very, very long. I think that by playing it in 2D, you basically cut the game in half, but that's still 60 freaking hours. So it wouldn't exactly make it a quick playthrough, and I think that at this point I've waited too long, and Dragon Quest III, the remake, the release is very imminent, and I just don't have time to get through 11, even if I played in 2D. But there's also the fact that I kind of think that it looks like junk. There's something about the sprites. I don't know if it is faithful to the SNES games. I think that it is going for a 16-bit look, but I don't know if that's how the 16-bit Dragon Quest games looked. Because my main experience with the quote-unquote 2D Dragon Quests were actually the DS and 3DS remakes of 4, 5, and 6, which were, sprite-based, quote unquote, but the sprites were moving around in 3D environments, and there was like trickery and fakery to make them they jazzed the games up and visually while keeping the 2D sprites. But the games never looked like that on the Super Nintendo. They never looked like they did on the DS. And I kind of don't like it. There's something about the sprite work that doesn't. It seemed like the environments are not super interesting looking, and the sprites, the characters, like the villagers, kind of just blend in a little bit with like the dirt that they're on. The ground. It's not. I feel like maybe like visually the game is not that thoughtfully made in 2D mode. But I just looked up online and I was trying to find, I just Googled like Dragon Quest 11 2D mode ugly ? And I'm not really seeing people complain about this. So maybe I'm just being, again, whiny, just like when I'm playing Dragon.
Maybe not many people played it in that mode.
Well,
that could be it too.
But the people who did really seem to enjoy it overall. But there are things that I'm now aware of from the complaints that they do have that, again, kind of give me pause. Like there are things that show up in the 3D version of the game that don't show up in the 2D version. Like you'll have fewer crafting tables, whatever that means. I don't remember. You'll have... maybe like some items that you might be looking for in 3D that just don't exist in a 2D mode. Like there was a situation where someone had to go and switch to the 3D mode momentarily to go find an item that they needed for whatever reason. And when you do switch, it's not seamless, like you have to find a church, and there the churches is where you can save your game. But so in this in this edition of the game, that's where you can also switch from 2D to 3D or vice versa. But when you do, it doesn't change everything. It doesn't switch a version on you on the spot. Like you don't retain the place that you were at in the story. Like it kind of shoves you back to the beginning of whatever story chapter that the last one that you started.
So it kind of takes you back to a bookmark and reloads that whole chapter, I guess you could say.
Which means that you might lose several hours of progress. So that doesn't sound like a great option. Now, I didn't, read very thoroughly all the complaints that people had. Like, I don't know if in this situation, the person was looking for a story, critical item or just like something that they wanted to craft some powerful weapon. If it's the latter, maybe I'm not looking to get into that kind of, I'm not going to get into it all that deeply, so I wouldn't mind. But if it's like story critical, then it's kind of a fatal flaw. I'm guessing that can't be the case. So anyway, so I don't know. Like I started it, but I'm not really feeling it. And it really, it just doesn't turn the game just 2D. Like, it also turns it more old school. If I recall correctly, the game in 3D, for several of the past Dragon Quest games now, you don't have random encounters anymore. Like, you see the enemies on the screen, on the map, and you can avoid them, or you can go to them. Like, you can see usually, they're represented by the main monster that you're going to be fighting, the monster groups that you meet are not always composed of just one type of monster. But let's just say that you see on the world map a metal slime, you have to go jump on it, it's going to disappear very quickly. Usually they're kind of elusive and, for a good reason. Like they're the enemy that give you a lot of XP in one shot when you can kill them. But with random encounters, you don't get that. You just get a random encounter. You step on a tile and a battle starts and, you get what you get. So the 2D mode gets random encounters. The battle system doesn't really quite work the same because in 3D, like your characters, I believe, and the monsters kind of go back and forth. Like it's not always like you don't select all of your party's moves and then you see it play out in the battle scene like in a very old school RPG. In the 3D mode, you would select something, your character would do it, and then maybe it would be the monster's turn, and then it would be your next character's turn, and you would choose their actions then. But in the 2D mode, it's back to the very old school thing where like you select what everyone is going to do in your party, and no one moves before you've selected everything for everyone, which makes it a lot harder to strategize, because you don't, one of your party members will like whiff an attack, and then like the next party member is going to do something else that maybe you would have changed on the spot if you had known that your previous character would miss the attack that you thought would finish that one enemy,
Yep.
So I'm not sure if I'm up for that kind of old school experience in the first place. The last big 2D RPG that I played was Live Alive, and that game was not old school. It was like kind of a weird mishmash of experiences and like RPG adjacent adventures, and it was really, really interesting. But for the most part, like that game didn't have random encounters except for the final 8th chapter that you could do after you did all the previous 7 ones. And that chapter was an old school throwback to a Dragon Quest like RPG experience, and that had random encounters, and that, in my opinion, was the weakest part of the game because it was too old school. Anyway, so all this to say that I guess like my taste in RPGs have changed. Dragon Quest the series has changed, has evolved past what it was 20 years ago, and so I'm not sure if I'm up for going back to that 20-year ago experience.
Well, I mean, just because mechanics are classic doesn't mean they're good.
Yeah. Yeah, you might be nostalgic for them, but then I I find that I am not.
Yeah, well, I mean, effectively what you were describing there was the original Final Fantasy, where, you go back and play it now and you're like, okay, so the monster, so I targeted the same monster with two of my players.
Yeah.
The first one killed it, and now the second one just like sits there and does nothing and whiffs on it. Like, what?
Yep.
It's just like, yeah.
Yeah, it's jarring when you're not playing that game in 1990.
Yeah. Yeah.
They would fix that very quickly afterwards, in the subsequent Final Fantasies. So, they knew that, I guess they got the feedback and they didn't do it again, but for a reason. Yeah. Anyway, so that I guess we'll see if I keep playing it. But I've got other RPGs actually I could be playing. I don't have much to say about this, but Trials of Mana just showed up on Game Pass. And it's funny because I was recently looking to maybe buy the Switch version, the physical cart, because I got in my head that ever since, I bought the Chrono Trigger DS cartridge and that went up in price, in resale prices. I thought, you know what? I should get these Square Enix games physically because they're a good investment. I don't think that's going to pan out. But anyway, I was on the lookout to buy Trials of Mana on cartridge on Switch on sale, and then eventually I was looking for through my collection. I realized I had already bought it earlier this year. I felt like an idiot, so I was like, okay, well, I guess I should play this because this is absurd. This is my back. If I don't remember what I have in my backlog, that's a warning sign. And then the game shows up on Game Pass before I even Yeah, I know, John, you understand my pain. But the game shows up on Game Pass before I even put the game in the Switch, and I'm like, this is the universe taunting me. You've waited too long. You could have played this game for free, and for higher resolution, probably higher frame rate. Anyway, so all this to say that I might switch to Trials of Mana, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah. Well, all right. I think that will bring new business to a close. I'll talk about, I know I keep kind of punting on FC25, but, that's just kind of going to be a rant.
I'm sorry. I keep going
more than
on
anything.
for too long on my,
No, that's all right. That's all right.
My games that I'm not even fully enjoying.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Yeah, so I think that will wrap new business, and we'll take a break here on this October 3rd, 2024, which I forgot to say at the start of the show. So there you go. There's your carbon dating. And so we'll take a break, and we will see you all with listener mail on the other side of the break. And we are back on Radio Free Nintendo with some listener mail. And amazingly enough, apparently I've broken our Discord chat curse, where you could not put text in the chat without Discord destroying it. Discord is something, man. We complain about Skype, but man, Discord has its own problems. But nevertheless, we will move on. And Greg, could you read the first email?
Sure. I mean, just imagine how much better my delivery is going to be now. I mean, it's pretty good before, but now that it's actually just from the chat, I mean, I'm putting a lot of pressure on it, but I'm willing to accept it. So, Bikenite writes, "Hey, fellow old timers. I just finished the original Paper Mario on NSO with the N64 controller. Oh yeah, I'm that cool. And watching the credits got me to thinking, outside of the well-known people, directors, producers and CEOs, have any of you followed any individual developers' careers? Like maybe you really like the music of a game and only played another one because they were on it. Or maybe the person who did background art, character design, maybe sound effects. Figured if anyone would, it would be one of y'all."
I would say I do this more with music folks more than anything else. I would say and a lot of it too, I have a soft spot for, chiptune Commodore 64 music, and one of the guys I follow, who is super old school now, but Rob Hubbard, who did a lot of early musical work on the Commodore 64 for games like Commando, and a few other games like that, Skate or Die, things like that. He did actually move over to Electronic Arts. So one of the games I just realized recently that he actually did the music for is NHL 94 on the Sega Genesis, which I didn't even realize that he had actually done that music. But he's one of those guys where up until probably about maybe the mid 90s, his name pops up a lot just across game music. And I recently got a book about him. It's called Rob Hubbard, Master of Magic, and it goes through every single game that he did music for. So I'm a big fan of his. Not that he's really too active now, but just in general, he's one of the particular people I follow. And I'm sure there's some other people that follow musical, video game composers as well.
Oh yeah, composers is the kind of the most kind of obvious one within the scope of this question, because I guess it's just one of those things where we all know that video games, and especially as time's gone on, it's only become more true, right? It's just such a intense collaborative effort, you know what I mean? So much goes into these games today that, the feeling the contributions of an individual, you might be kind of hoping too much, because it just they're gonna be feeding into such a larger collective effort. It's not always going to be particularly obvious how it's going to come through. Like I said, earlier on, the earlier days, obviously teams were smaller and so forth, so maybe that was more sort of plausible. But with music, even though still music, I mean, that has become more and more, a lot of these large scale kind of soundtracks will have multiple composers and so forth. And I mean, one of the sort of early examples that I would cite has kind of graduated to a fair degree to like supervising more than actually providing the endless amounts of tracks, would be Mitsuda, the composer on Chrono Trigger, or the principal composer on Chrono Trigger, because actually, that had some songs composed by Uematsu of Final Fantasy kind of fame. I think largely because Mitsuda was not well, he worked himself into just complete exhaustion and wasn't able to produce all the kind of songs that he might have done with the development schedule there, and Uematsu had to kind of step in, but of course Chrono Trigger is just a very memorable soundtrack, so you're always kind of on the lookout for things that he's contributed to in the years hence as something that might be worth kind of tracking down, because you might well be able to detect his influence elsewhere, and there's some interesting examples of it. I mean, the obvious will be something like Chrono Cross, right? Well, you're expecting that, and guess what? It's amazing, that soundtrack. But you get weird things like he worked on the first Mario Party, I think it's that one. I mean, there's a lot of Mario Parties, so I don't know whether it could be, and I've not really played any of them, but I'm pretty sure it's the first one that has like Mitsuda music for it, which is like very interesting. But then, over the years, you get kind of, like I said, a bit of this kind of graduation to, kind of with, the Xenoblade games really kind of, being a kind of overseer. A lot of the songs that, I dearly love from the Xenoblade soundtracks are not going to be his, like that's just true, because there's a lot of other artists on those soundtracks, but still, I guess, to some extent, he's shaping, in that kind of supervisory capacity, he's shaping the kind of direction, the overall kind of feel that they're trying to establish in those games, and that is not a kind of trivial thing. And of course, there still are, direct contributions from him. I believe, the first game, I think Yoko Shimomura may have done the title theme, perhaps. But then I think subsequent ones would have been Mitsuda they would always be the kind of the title theme is like the piano version. And then the end credits is the vocal version. You know, it's pretty much a law of Japanese video game development. It must end with with a vocal song at the end. Like, so I think those would generally be kind of Mitsuda's domain a lot of the time anyway. But yeah, and of course Shimomura as well, it must be said, is another one that you definitely followed since the 90s. Even something like, for instance, she's done so much work on Kingdom Hearts, which is a series I've never played. But then, when they did the Kingdom Hearts, rhythm game, Melody of Memory, I want to say, it's like, oh yeah, I'll get that. Because, it's a rhythm game. It seems like it's pretty similar to theatre rhythm, and I can kind of enjoy these, soundtracks of hers in some sort of context, and so again, like you wouldn't be, buying that game if you weren't following that person's career and so forth. So it's definitely something with composers I've done quite a lot of.
Yeah, I don't, I guess like I don't follow people in general. I kind of it's hard to do, just to keep up with the amount of games that are out there. So I feel like in my teenage years, maybe like I did read like most of what Philip K. Dick wrote, but now I look back on that era of my life and I'm like, was it really worth it? I'm not particularly a Philip K. Dick fan still today, and I don't know, it's only vaguely useful, ? When like yet another one of his short stories gets turned into a 2-hour-long movie that really can't support it. Like they really had to struggle to find ways to stretch a premise that thin into a 2-hour-long vehicle with Matt Damon and Emily Blunt. But anyway, I digress. Actually, that was not one of the worst adaptations.
That was Adjustment Bureau, right? That one?
The Adjustment Bureau. But yeah, like there are others like Next with Nicolas Cage or of course the infamous Paycheck by John Woo with Ben Affleck and Uma Thurman. That was... my God, like the premise was so, very, very simple. And then, they tried to turn that into, to shoot like a 90-hour action movie in the streets of Vancouver. And, it just doesn't work. Nothing about that movie works.
I still haven't seen that, which is unusual because I usually get something out of a John Woo film, whether it's entirely earnest appreciation or not. I usually get some kind of enjoyment out of it, but still haven't got around to
at a certain point they're like, yeah, they really will sell the rights to any Philip K. Dick story to anyone really, regardless. It's like they just like that money.
Yeah, I had this weird anyway, it's not on topic, but the movie Screamers, like I saw before I read the short story. I had no idea that it was based on the Philip K. Dick short story when I first saw it as a teenager.
Peter Weller, RoboCop, right?
It does, and Roy Dupuis. It's like by Christian something. Like it's basically a Quebecois movie, like or like by like a lot of Quebecois filmmakers, and I think that's why I knew about it. Like it was hyped up in our media because it was like, oh look, like this big Hollywood production by local boy Christian whatever, and I it was not a great movie.
I haven't seen that in ages. I remember it was just on telly in the 90s, and it was just one of these things where it's literally like you'd have the newspapers like TV guide supplement thing, just like actually gave it a decent review. So it was like, right, what's that? And it seemed like it was somewhat fun, and that was probably. Yeah.
But then, like
25 years ago, I don't know, maybe more.
But then, like decades later, I read the short story, and it was one of the more kind of fleshed out, like novella, like length stories, and I was like, wow, this is like beat for beat that movie that I barely remember. And then I realized, like, okay, yeah, it was an adaptation of that. Anyway, enough for that digression. I'm sorry. I guess, like, maybe one game maker that I do vaguely follow, but not very well, is Melos Hantani. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that name right, but the person behind Anodyne, a game that is playable on the Switch. I've talked about it on this podcast. I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years ago, and I really enjoyed it. But I think that before I talked about Anodyne, there was also Even the Ocean, which was a game made much later than Anodyne, which was their first game. But it was like this interesting little kind of 2D platformer that I forget the details now of the mechanics and the most of the story. But I do remember that both those games had kind of a surprising personal touch to them, and because mostly they were made by like 1 or 2 people, and so like you could really see like the whatever is in their minds, when they were making that game, like whatever themes that they wanted to tackle. Like it kind of felt more personal than I don't know, playing like any Ubisoft game or what have you. And Anodyne had like also was very, very much you could see the influence from specifically Link's Awakening. And so I was into that. I was like, oh, cool. Someone who, for who Link's Awakening specifically was like a formative game, made this really personal game. That's really cool. And then Anodyne also like kind of becomes something much more strange than just like a Link's Awakening homage, because eventually it asks that you basically break the game, because one of the items has the effect of basically like you can switch tiles around and kind of create paths where there shouldn't be a path, and it's this weird mishmash of like a kind of a Link's Awakening world, but then like it kind of crosses over into those glitchy Metroid on the NES rooms that you can get into if you get stuck in a door, and then you do this weird thing of like rolling into a ball and bombing up, and then like you basically like there's a bug where like you can basically get into rooms that are not even rooms that are meant to be in the game. Like they're kind of like weird data that shouldn't be there on the cartridge. And like once you explore one of those rooms, usually you can't get out of them because they're not even meant to be there in the first place. Anyway, so the Anodyne kind of played with that idea of getting into places in the game where you shouldn't be, and so it was like really original. And so that person made a whole lot more games. Like there's Anodyne 2, which I bought and still haven't played. Another one on the backlog, and Symphony is another game. And like most of their games are actually are available on the Switch outside of maybe one. And so I've played 2 of them. I think I would play more of them, but I just I need to find the time. But it's one person that I keep an eye on, just because like someone else turned me onto them. I remember listening to a podcast, and Daniel Riendo on the Waypoint Radio podcast, or whatever that was called back in the day, Vice Gaming podcast, talked about Even the Ocean, and I was like, that sounds really interesting. I want to play that game. And so like it's weird, like she was really into that developer, and that kind of like I caught that. I was like, that sounds really neat. And it's not normally something that happens to me, like I don't latch on to every kind of pet developer of like some podcaster that I happen to hear about. Anyway.
Well, I think you've kind of hit on a very important point, was that I think you've seen the industry grow from a point in the early 80s where you could literally have one person doing the design, programming, and music, if there was any, on a particular game, into the 90s where you had, probably a couple of people doing the programming, maybe one person doing the design, and so that makes it easier. Like in those cases, 80s and 90s, it was a lot easier to say, this one person is doing the programming, this one person is doing the game design, this one person did this, because the teams were smaller.
Mm-hmm.
But now, on these AAA titles, you have teams of hundreds of people where you can't even pin down, like, yes, there is like an executive producer or a producer overall, but there's so many different teams, and games do so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
Multiplayer, single player campaign, there's all kinds of different things. So it's very hard to even know who's doing what on a game, and even if there are people in charge of those, how much do they really do? You really have no idea. So I think indie games are now the new 80s and 90s games where you have these small teams, so you can actually sit there and pick out one person and say, oh, they did the majority of the design and the programming on this game.
Right. So it would be hard. Like sometimes you kind of get something on social media, like you might get someone who posts like a clip of a game and like, look at this animation, it's so cute or funny or whatever, and like, look how weird it is, and I love it. And then like you might actually have the animator who came up with it like say like, hey, I made that, I'm glad you appreciate it. So you get those moments sometimes, but then are you going to follow that animator to see like, okay, I'm going to look at their resume and like, what other weird little animation might have they made in this other completely different game? Like that's not really how it works.
Yeah.
It's much easier. It's something that's much easier to do with like music, for instance, like, like you're into a band, and then like you go in a chat room and you ask like, I'm into these guys, what should I listen to? And then you've got an army of people who are just like, oh, if you like these guys, you love these and these. And what about like the proto band that all these people actually were listening to, and they all cribbed from this one band that's actually not popular except to these other musicians who all crib from them.
Yeah.
But like with games, that's that's much more rare, or it's much more obvious, like as I said, like Melo Santani, like their inspiration was Link's Awakening. It's very obvious, and it's Nintendo. There's no it's like trying to find someone who drew inspiration from Spider-Man or Marvel characters or something, like these institutions, like it's not
it's a cultural touchstone type of thing that loads of people would draw inspiration from.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, with indie stuff, I've got a couple of indie kind of ones I can think of because, like you said, it's a little bit, it kind of reins things back in a bit, doesn't it? And I could definitely think the composer on Celeste, Lena Raine, like that I really enjoyed that soundtrack. So that's someone that you kind of look out for. If it's mentioned, that she's doing stuff on another indie game, like I think Chicory, I have not played it, but, I've kind of, followed that because, she did soundtrack on that. I might get around to it one day. And then I believe she's making, actually, developing as well. She has a background in game development, as well as composition, on a new kind of hybrid game, which is like a shoot 'em up, but also like a kind of has like top down, kind of adventure game, dialogue sequences or, kind of RPG style, like dialogue sequences and narrative alongside this kind of shoot 'em up gameplay, coming up at some point called Another Real, I think it would presumably how it'd be pronounced, but, definitely something, that I'll be keeping an eye on just because of, how much I enjoyed that element of Celeste and, how much it added to that experience. And you just kind of think, well, it's worth, keeping updated on those sorts of things because, again, it's just one of those relatively rare. I'd love to be able to come up with something more concrete with like, character designs and all that kind of thing. But, a lot of the time, they feel pretty kind of wedded together with a certain kind of, series or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, when they might do something for a completely different kind of project, it's just the kind of a particular style might not be that apparent because, you know, they're being asked to do something different. You know, they're doing a job, but with music, and that's still true of composers as well, of course. But, you know, I feel like at least have more potential for it to kind of still come through. The particular kind of sensibility or style.
Yeah. I would say just like kind of an offshoot question that I would pose is, do you think the era of the kind of auteur, I use that phrase lightly, but kind of the auteur game designer, like I'm just thinking of how Konami, it just pretty much like erased Kojima from they just erased him from their entire history. So, because he was getting big, and so it felt like Konami didn't really want people to follow just him. Like they almost wanted to make their developers anonymous again, in a way. And I feel like Nintendo has kind of moved away from Miyamoto being the spokesperson. Obviously, he's not working on as many games and all that. And he's moved on to kind of a different role. But I feel like the industry has shifted away from the Miyamotos and the Kojimas, sort of. It's just over time.
In terms of marketing, like, I mean, like you said, there's like fundamentals going on in terms of, you know, the projects are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and, you know, like, more complex, and the idea of it being, you know, a singular kind of vision is less and less tenable. You know, you're trying to sell people on that. But then also, like you said, it also maybe to some extent people don't, I should say, you know, companies are not always as eager to do it either. Like, so there was a time where it felt like that this is what they wanted. You know, it's just like, you know, we want to, so, you know, for instance, with Nintendo, isn't it? It's just like, oh, well, you should buy Pikmin because it's Miyamoto's come up with it, and he's the great genius of our time when it comes to video games. So you simply must play Pikmin. You simply must play Nintendo, because even if you don't think you've got an interest in some sort of virtual pet type of thing, it's Miyamoto's idea. You've got to play it, you know. And it does kind of feel like we've left that behind to some degree. Although, you know, I mean, I think before that sort of time, there was probably more so with Japanese companies of like wanting to keep their developers anonymous because they would probably be afraid that someone would come along and poach them. You know, they would actually pay them something more approximate to what they were worth.
Yeah.
So
and that goes all the way back into the 80s too, with Atari refusing to put their developers' names in the game to the point where they have to go in and put a hidden room in the game with their name in it.
No,
you know,
so right. I guess maybe there's just a cyclical component to this in terms of, you know, we go from, you know, let's keep these people anonymous to, oh, actually, we can use their names to sell it, to like, no, actually. Because
specifically in Nintendo's case, like, aren't we having a little bit more difficulty now, like actually finding out what studio is actually working?
Yeah, they really are not being very forthcoming with that information. I mean, obviously, you know, people will ferret it out and eventually, but with a lot of the time, again, how much of this is just a marketing thing of like, okay, well, you know, stuff like Princess Peach, you know, Princess Peach Showtime, or Luigi's Mansion, or, you know, Echoes of Wisdom now, like, they're like, oh, well, no, they're Nintendo games. They're just like all the other Nintendo games. We don't want to, like, you know, sort of create some sort of separation of like, well, this is a real Zelda game and this is some outsourced thing that we're just like slapping the license on and all that. So I don't know if it's that, you know, that they just don't want to reinforce any notions out there about, you know, certain games not being, you know, kind of legitimate in a particular series or whatever. But, you know, I think you could go too far with that. I can understand it somewhat from a commercial point of view and just like a PR point of view, but also like, you know, these people make the games, they deserve to be recognized as such.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the companies too, I mean, it can come back to bite you if this person is hailed as a genius and they make something that's just not received well, right? I mean, Miyamoto is, you know, we Wii Music is a famed misstep of his.
It's a fair point. That is the thing, isn't it?
Right?
It's like, but well, because it limits your ability to play that card again, doesn't it? When something like that happens. And of course, the other part of it is if it works, then do you end up getting out leveraged? And I think that maybe, was I don't know very much about specifics with Kojima, but I imagine, maybe that was part of the problem there is maybe Kojima thought he had more leverage than he actually did. And Konami wanted to, ultimately kind of prove that they could get by, without having to accommodate his particular kind of, desires and needs or whatever he communicated. So, yeah, you could certainly have it go astray. And also, you could almost be a victim of your own success with it if you kind of create somebody that, again, like, are they going to get poached by another company? Are they just going to make demands that you really don't want to meet because it's, cost prohibitive, or it's going to upset other people in the company? They're the internal
as far as I could tell with Kojima, the answer is yes. For those questions that come out of Konami,
yeah, but also with Kojima, I think part of it is he becomes inseparable from Metal Gear in the public's mind. So it becomes, a Metal Gear game. You can't have a Metal Gear game without Kojima. This just isn't a real Metal Gear game without him, which is definitely not what Konami wants, for sure. Not that they've done anything with Metal Gear forever and a day, aside from do remakes, but I digress. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting topic, because the more you start to think about it, like you do I think we follow some composers and some designers based on how much companies allow us to, or how much information they give us.
Well, and that's the thing about composers, actually, especially with regard to Japanese composers, people who we think of as making, really big, contributions to, the earlier days, somebody like Shimomura doing Street Fighter 2, Mitsuda, Chrono Cross, Uematsu, Final Fantasy. But what happened later is they became kind of contractors, right? They stopped being direct employees of the publisher. And so it became much more natural to be like, well, no, I'm not just like some, rank and file employee of this company. And all Squaresoft games have wonderful soundtracks or something. It became much more like, well, no, these people are kind of separate entities. And, they are going to, if they're going to work on something, they're going to get credit for it. And, people are going to be able to follow them across their various endeavors. And certainly Yuzo Koshiro, who's another, person that, I think a lot of people would, kind of follow his contributions to games across a large period of time. I mean, he was always, credited on the title screens of games, early, because it's like, it was relatively kind of, unusual and kind of, I guess, maybe forward thinking, because he and, was it his sister or something that they had a company, Ancient, and so they always had that music credit kind of, through that essentially, although those kind of early Sega games. And then, obviously, to this day, it's still, producing the music for games and actually producing kind of retro indie games. I think there's some sort of literal Mega Drive shooter that he's making at the minute, a game that will function on an actual Mega Drive, but, is a new game, some sort of shoot 'em up or something. And of course, Streets of Rage, Etrian Odyssey, so much, ActRaiser, so much stuff. But, he, was able, just through, I unfortunately can't remember the specifics, but he was able to really kind of raise awareness of his contributions from the very beginning, even before you got that wider movement of, okay, people are going independent and you've got to kind of, bring them, onto a job, specifically, rather than just you're part of the house composer group, because they would do Konami, speaking of them again, a lot of the time, the music credits for some of their older games was just the Konami Kukeha Club or whatever, right?
Well, yeah, I've seen that with some of the tracks that you add to the end of the podcast. I'll go look it up and see. Okay, well, who was the composer? And it'll say it'll just list several people for that game, and you can't tell which track was done by who.
Because basically, what you had at those days, the Japanese developers, a lot of them had these, was like the in-house like band of the composers that worked for them, and then they would rather just credit the soundtrack to that group. The Konami Kukeha Club, or I'm trying to remember some of the other ones. What
Sega was the same way.
Sega definitely had one. Taito as well. Like that was very much is something that applied to them. And so they'd rather just credit the group, which essentially is just like crediting the company. It's just like, oh, there's a company music department, rather than like raising the profile of individuals involved. So like I said, but Koshiro kind of it was in front of that, in those early years with his own company and stuff. So yeah, you kind of see, you just with the composers, you get a little bit of a window into the kind of, the ebb and flow of that over the years of like the tensions of how much they're willing to credit people and how much they're willing to let them have their own profile.
Yep. All right. Let's move on to the next email here. Guillaume, could you read it?
Sure. One writes, greetings, video game Argonauts. I'm a big fan of The Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword because of its combat mechanics and its narrative. In particular, the introduction of perfect parry possible with a shield bash, which continues in Breath of the Wild. Which one is that?
Hyrule Warriors, Age of Calamity.
Yes, and Tears of the Kingdom. Difficult to master, it's proved to be very useful and quite entertaining to perform. I believe the technique was first introduced in some fashion in Twilight Princess, but it is in Skyward Sword where it took the form it currently has. What are the gameplay mechanics that you found the most satisfying in any video game? Bye-bye. It's hard to beat a good parry. Like that's
countering of various sorts is very nice.
Yeah, like all the answers that I can think of, or like basically when I discovered that parries or something of that kind existed in action games and were awesome. I think that the why am I blanking on the name of these games? Onimusha. On the PlayStation 2. Have this system where, like if you time your block perfectly, then like you, get more whatever, like, currency from the demons that you're killing. And I don't know why specifically in that game, but I thought like, oh, that's awesome. Like that, it was just like a great mechanic. And then I feel like the, Bayonetta perfected that with Witch Time.
Yes,
which gave you a little bit more leniency. Like, but the better your timing, the more Witch Time you get to beat up enemies, and that is just like a fantastic mechanic. Where like if you do the thing at the exact right time, the enemy can't do anything, and you can just like bash it to hell. It's hard to beat.
Yeah, I mean, even Zelda has kind of incorporated that a bit with the flurry rush or whatever, like, and I'm sure there's goodness knows how many things. I don't know in particular, like how fairly you could say, like, which time, like, was, like, invented that or popularized it, but to what degree exactly, because I'm sure there's, very notable, games in that general sort of genre that preceded it, like that I haven't played, like the Devil May Cry games and Ninja Gaiden for Xbox and stuff. I'm not sure how much it owes to those, but I mean, obviously Bayonetta owes a fair bit to Devil May Cry in general. I know that much. But yeah, there's something, especially like in 2, which I think in 2 it's a bit more kind of, it's probably less mechanically like elegant and precise, but it's more like, kind of, doing stuff that feels good, like kind of thing. You definitely get some times where you get some enemies that are like really quite challenging, but then once you finally are able to kind of get a good counter in where it is, you establish that window to be able to hurt them. And then some of the like weapon combinations, like where you can use like the whip to like bring them in towards you. And then you can sort of, you've always got this ability to like in 2 to like use magic power to boost your attacks. And so in that time that you've got now that you've, with the perfect dodge, you just sort of activate that, you lasso them with the whip, bring them into you. And then you've got like chainsaws on your feet and you absolutely devastate their health bar with just grinding the chainsaw against them. It's very, very satisfying. It's just that kind of classic like tension of kind of nipping at something, or they're having it nip at you, and it's like back and forth, and then bang, the opportunity presents itself, and you make the most of it. I think for me that has its root. The satisfaction I take from that has its roots going all the way back to playing Punch-Out as the first video game I ever played. Because, you don't have like bullet time or witch time or anything like that, but you do, obviously, it's all about like countering in various ways, whether it's, dodge and then hit or whatever. But the biggest thing is the way you get the star punches and stuff, like those special things where it's like, if you hit them when they're in the middle of doing something, it like does extra damage, or gets you the star punch and then you can knock them out with that. Like I absolutely love that. That is brilliant. And definitely, when you get to like Punch-Out on Wii, they kind of took that even further. And also another one that kind of a game I can think of that has some of those elements really kind of strangely is Sin and Punishment 2. So like Sin and Punishment has the kind of signature element where you've got the sword for countering things as well as the gun for shooting them. So you get missiles coming in, you deflect them back and all that. But like certain bosses have like these like medals that you can get for basically doing Punch-Out shit with the sword. So it's like when you fight in the first main sort of stage, like proper of Sin and Punishment 2, there's the final boss of that is basically like Gamera, and like a baby Gamera at the same time. And like there's a part where it sort of, it's spitting fire and all this stuff spinning around, all this crazy shit. But there's parts where it will try and like claw you, and your instinct is just to dodge it. But if you say, no, fuck it, I'm going to hit it with the sword, like a special, like, medal just spits out and gives you extra points and stuff. Just like, that is really cool, if you ask me.
Yeah, for me, it's similar sort of timing based stuff, but anything where where it kind of rewards rhythm. So I'm thinking, for example, in something like Super Metroid, where you can lay bombs and you can lay them at certain heights so that you suddenly, you can get up to a ledge, and you can get up there by laying bombs. You just have to get the exact right timing of the explosions right to bounce you in ball form all the way up to the ledge. Like that kind of stuff. I will sit there for an inordinate amount of time doing that, just because it's like I'm chasing that high of like getting the perfect explosion cadence to get me up onto that ledge. And also, same sort of thing with anything that involves you kind of wall jumping back and forth in between two walls, going back and forth. I love that. I love being able to just get there, get into a cadence and just bounce and ping pong up to some place where I probably shouldn't be able to get to, but anything like that rewards me sort of being able to rhythmically do something so that my performance or my timing directly allows me to do more than I might normally do if I didn't have my timing down. So, anything like that.
Yeah. some of our answers just reminded me of just how much The Matrix with the bullet time influenced video games in ways that we don't even necessarily recognize today. But
and again, I mean, it's like with The Matrix, because it was so drawing on like Hong Kong action movies and anime and all that. It's like they didn't exactly invent that idea, but good God, did they popularize it like that? That's a really cast iron case of like, yeah. These things existed before The Matrix, but you wouldn't have had every video game and its mother incorporating them if it wasn't for the fact that movie was an absolute just shockwave across the entire entertainment landscape.
But I feel like maybe this is a stretch, but I feel like the Matrix is in some way to not to blame, but like a lot of I feel like there didn't used to be cinematic kind of slowdown of showing the action in games before The Matrix came out, and then like the doors were opened and no one managed to close them after that. And so again, like this might be a stretch, but I feel like Burnout has these kind of bullet time crashes that might be partially inspired by something like Bullet Time by The Matrix, it's part of the satisfaction, right? Like first, like I don't think that racing games before that, maybe some racing games did that, but I don't know of them. But like the fact that you could in a race crash the other cars and that would fill up your nitro for you to go faster. Is just a very fun mechanic, which I don't recall seeing in other racing games. And it just makes sense, you know, like, because I know that games like Destruction Derby or whatever existed before that, but they, like, if you were trying to crash the other cars, usually it wouldn't make you faster. You'd have to try to find a way to crash them without wrecking yourself, you know? But in a game like Burnout, like, okay, like, let's just like crush this car against the guardrail, and now my boost is full and I can just like go to the next person to go, you know, kill them.
I would advise anybody listening out there, if you haven't played Burnout Revenge or Burnout Paradise, play those games because they're really fun.
Yeah. And like when you crash a car in a race and solo anyway in single player, like you get the slowdown of like you see the car being crushed and, you know, the sparks flying and the wheel, you know, being ejected. Anyway, like, but yeah, so it all adds to the experience, makes it very, very satisfying.
Yeah. I would say, one other thing too, is like really this goes back to even RPGs way back, is any game that lets you sort of struggle, then your hard work is paid off by you effectively being a god that can destroy anything in the game.
Oh, yeah.
It's right in there. And RPGs do that over a slow time, but also a game
Metroid.
I was thinking Vampire Survivors, where that it does it on a very compact timeline, where if you get the right combination of weapons, you just pretty much, you can sit there and just basically put your controller down and just walk away, because you have this sphere around you that is just death to anything that tries to walk into it. So I find that just so it's hard at the beginning in that game, because you really don't have any of the perks unlocked or anything like that, and you don't have a lot of the good characters unlocked. But once you get over that hump, yeah, you're just sitting there and you're playing 30 minutes at a time, just sitting there, eventually just getting to a point where you just watch. It's just a symphony of destruction on your screen. It feels really good.
The impalement stuff is really good. You got to have to establish something as tricky, you know, in whatever way it might be. Because again, like you said, if this works in RPGs, it works in your Metroid, Castlevania, and then it can also work in these like run type games as well. And yeah, when you establish something is tricky, and then it's like, oh, now I'm just gonna, you know, click my fingers and they, you know, disintegrate or whatever. You know, it can be very satisfying. I mean, one thing I would say is kind of bit of a kind of broader thing to the countering, because the countering kind of family of mechanics is like a subset of this, is like stuff that plays with risk reward in general. Like, the idea that, if you encouraging you to be sort of dangerous, you know what I mean? Don't be conservative with your, typically, just, okay, well, I'm going to avoid this, that, and the other. It just, if it's like a racing game or shoot 'em up or something, like offering sort of inducements for go towards danger. I can think of, quite a few ones like that. For instance, the original N64 Bangai-O, for instance, where the whole point is like the more shit is like around you, the bigger kind of, missile barrage you can counter everything with. Like, so sometimes, if the sort of, wise thing to do if you're, kind of in a somewhat precarious situation is actually just leap headlong into it and hope you just, position yourself properly and time things properly and get that shot off that then just kills everything in this sort of shower of, points in the form of fruit. But there's like other thing, we talked a little bit, Guillaume was talking about Cruising Blast, like Excite Truck and all that again of like, you get extra points for driving really close to like trees and shit that might end up causing you to crash, and like you get more points for that. So these sorts of things where it's like, no, because I think probably it works on me maybe more than it might work on other people, because my natural disposition is to be very conservative. But sometimes it gets the game mechanics kind of force you to be otherwise, and it actually pays off. That is quite a rewarding experience.
Yeah, like in Burnout, driving on the other side of the street. It's great. You're driving into oncoming traffic, you get extra, extra nitro. It's great. It's really good. All right, so there's a bunch. Let's move on to let's do one more email here, and I will read this one. AG writes, "Hello all. I recently got access to Apple Plus, so I finally got to watch the Tetris movie, which depicts Hank Rogers' adventure securing the Tetris license. I've read the story of Tetris from David Sheff's excellent book, so I knew it was mostly true, and it makes me wonder, are there any other stories from game development that could be dramatized? It could be anything from the madness of Final Fantasy 15, I'm not too sure if he means 14 there, Metroid Prime 4's saga, the Nintendo PlayStation, or the court drama of Epic versus Apple. Are there any stories you want to see adapted? And how would the stories have creative license applied to them?"
I like that last part. I've not seen the Tetris movie, but there's something about a car chase that was blatantly an invention. So
it's a pretty wild movie. A little bit too long for what it is, but it's a good time. Yes.
Oh yeah. I guess what is our for whatever we come up with, we've got to have an equivalent of the sort of gratuitous car chase or something. To be fair, John, Final Fantasy 15 had a pretty ridiculous development history as well as 14.
Are we talking about the Nova Crystallis, whatever or other kind of thing?
Well, it was like Final Fantasy 15 was at one point Final Fantasy versus 13. Correct?
Right. Yes.
You're right.
So
I've forgotten all of this.
And that was
sordid history.
How many years before Final Fantasy 15 actually came out? I mean, it was ages. It was like a decade or something, wasn't it? I mean, it's just mad how long that all took. So I would imagine there's a somewhat interesting story in there somewhere if you could get access. Again, that's the problem, isn't it? We touched on this a bit with the issue of developers having proper credit, or how much the companies want to keep it a sort of closed box that we have no idea how it works in there, and all that. So I don't know whether the sort of full kind of drama of what was going on in these situations is something that anyone is ever going to get access to. I mean, I guess that's another thing that's kind of unique about the Tetris story, is that it was a time and the particulars of it meant that, there was certain amount of access possible for people who, were there and so forth. But, I mean, Metroid Prime 4 is mentioned, which is, a saga that's yet to end. So I don't want to, prejudge the worthiness of that. But what about the first one? I mean, that was a saga. You know, I mean, that whole thing, you know, where Retro is, you know, developing like 5 games at once or whatever. And, you know, Miyamoto's, and other Nintendo people are dispatched there to, you know, inspect what they're doing. And, you know, basically virtually everything gets cancelled and we're, you know, changing, you know, to the perspective of the game and all this sort of pressure and all this sort of stuff. And then in the end, you know, it comes out and it's hailed as a, you know, very unique and kind of very accomplished title. I mean, that there's a fair amount of story there that you could work with, I think.
Is there like a whole side story that's in I guess we don't get DVD extras anymore, but yeah, like we see the cutscenes of there's like they had the whole parallel story of the guy who came up with the Guy game. I don't know. Was that guy for former Retro person?
There was
no?
some unpleasantness about people at Retro. I don't know the details, so I hesitate to speak about that at all, really. But possibly could be, you know, if it were done properly, I guess maybe that could be something that would be, you know, kind of added to the drama of it. But
right, but ultimately they decide like, no, this is not essential to the story that we're trying to tell, and so yeah,
it ends
people
up
who
in
buy the Blu-ray will get to see it.
It ends up in the quote unquote director's cut.
Right.
Yeah, I would say I would say a story that I'm actually surprised has, just because it's popped up in several books at this point, that it hasn't been, as far as I know, has not been turned into a TV show or a movie, is the creation of the first Doom and Doom 2 and all of that and id Software like that. That's actually like if you read like a book like Masters of Doom. I haven't read John Romero's Doom Guy book where he kind of goes through his childhood and talks about, you know, why id Software kind of imploded in terms of personnel and stuff like that. But there's just a lot there from these guys that effectively just built this game. It was just a couple of guys that you know, that built this game really from scratch. You have, you know, John Carmack is like it feels like you have all of the characters that you would normally have in something like Silicon Valley or something like that, where, you know, you have John Carmack, who is the game engine, graphical, visual genius. And then you have John Romero, who is kind of more he's a programmer, designer, sort of, kind of more of a rock star guy. And then you have, you know, people like American McGee come in, and then like, you know, the other guy, Tom, I forget his last name, but, you have all of these different personalities, but not so many that you lose track of them. There's like a key 5 or 6 people involved. And it's just, to me, it'd be tailor-made for a movie or a TV show, where you could track these different characters. And then also after Doom blows up and they go on to form Ion Storm, and they spend a ton of money building a studio at the top of a skyscraper. And then, you know, they release Daikatana, and that game bombs, and the studio goes under. It's like just all this drama, and really like one of those things where these were people who were at the very cutting edge of something that this was the first time that this particular thing had happened, really, where, you know, these guys came from effectively being shareware developers, to just being like kind of video game rock stars. Even before, you know, before you had people like Cliffy B or anybody like that. These were kind of the first guys to really, you know, these were the guys who were the young programmers who were driving around Ferraris because they made so much money off of this game that they made. So I think that would be a pretty fascinating TV show or movie.
Yeah, well, just as soon as you started talking about that, I was thinking, well, you know, you've got the Rise part with, you know, Doom 2 and all that. And then, yeah, I mean, if it was a series, or, you know, multiple films, you know, that could be like one part, but then, you know, you've got the fall, you've got the tragedy, the farce of Daikatana, because it does everything I've ever heard about that just sounds like it is, yeah, just the very, easily kind of adaptable to a drama format, hubris, just the classic, pride going before a fall situation. So I think it would lend itself pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah, my problem with this question is I'm really too ignorant about the story behind the making of most games that I can't. I don't know what would actually make for a good story, but I feel like I've seen enough of those kind of what's the word? Not schlocky, but kind of derivative, pseudo biographical or historical movies to at least like envision the beats that are completely bullshit about a story,
right.
about the making of a game. Like if Nintendo were not Nintendo, if they were, they would not allow this to happen. But I can envision like a movie about the creation of Super Mario Brothers, and young Miyamoto is just like is tasked with saving the company, turning
Who's
this
the bad
arcade
guy,
game,
right?
Turning into this failed arcade game, this Space Invaders clone, into a successful game, and like I just can't find the inspiration, and then like he's walking in the street and like in front, there's like a scaffolding and he goes under the scaffolding and then the barrel falls next to him, like he's almost killed, and he's just like, huh? And then like he looks across the street and like a theater is playing King Kong, and like you see like the swelling music or whatever, and like, oh, that's how he got his idea. Or like,
And then in a window up above, a child is playing a xylophone, and they do doot 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 doot, and then it all comes together.
I was just I was rather envisioning Koji Kondo just like writing on paper and always like crumpling the paper like that's no good, and then like
not good
something in the sound like around him just like doot 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 doot, and he's just the flash of genius, like that's it, that's our song, that's our tune.
It's a formula. It applied to a lot of stuff.
And then the inevitable falling out between whoever. Who's the other Mario guy?
Tezuka, just like in this version, Tezuka and Miyamoto are just at loggerheads the whole time. But it's eventually,
like Tezuka, like you've lost your soul or your
but in this
vision.
Case, the sort
it used to be about Mario.
In this case, the dramatic license. Not that we haven't already used it a lot, but they basically just have the lightsaber fight from episode 3. Against each other, but they're just eventually just so sort of tired from it going on forever that they're like, screw it, let's just put our differences aside and finish the game, and then it's a happy ending.
It used to be about plumbing.
The whole Donkey Kong thing, though, in general, I mean, that with the court case and all that stuff, like that
would be,
that seems like, again, if you had a more sort of pliable sort of company than Nintendo, you'd kind of think that that would have some mileage in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, really, it's a lot of. I feel like a lot of game development is actually really boring. But you really have to have the people, like there's the documentary about Billy Mitchell, right? Isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
The King of Kong thing with the high score,
King of Kong,
the high score contest thing, and he's basically cast as the villain, in that. Which subsequent things have suggested that was a decent bit of casting, but how fair it actually is to him, I don't know that. Obviously, I didn't edit it.
Yeah. Well, it's always funny with those kinds of movies because you realize that, I mean, they are from somebody's perspective. Like, I think of, like, not in the video game space, but I think of, like, Straight Outta Compton, where it was, like, the story of, like, Dr. Dre, Eazy-E, NWA, and all that stuff. And they kind of paint Dr. Dre in a better light, or they leave some things out about Dr. Dre that would make him look like him slapping women and stuff like that. That would make him look really bad, and that's just like completely not in that movie. And so I watched it, and I'm like, okay.
I mean, he is a producer on it, right? Probably.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure he is. He's
that's the difference between like the Elton John biopic and the Queen one, where Freddie Mercury did not have a say on what was in that movie, but Elton John did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think definitely, though, one I would actually like to see a story of. It would actually be interesting to see the story of the whole PlayStation, Nintendo, super, kind of super CD sort of thing.
Yes, well, it's an inflection point in the history of the medium, the industry anyway, especially, and the whole kind of like Philips sidebar thing. Like I recently heard something about that whole thing that I'd either never picked up or just forgotten it. But those games like the CDI Zelda games and was it Mario's whatever Hotel Mario, the other stuff they had on there. That was not so much a consequence of the actual sort of deal that Nintendo did with Philips after they reneged on the deal they were going to do with Sony. But it was actually some sort of like make good on a settlement that Nintendo had with Philips about so I can't remember particular what the beef was, something to do with copyrights or patents. I can't remember the specifics, but there was something where essentially, they had to settle with Philips on something. Mm-hmm. And part of how they kind of made good with it was, you can use some of our characters in something. And that's actually, kind of where you got like the CDI Zelda games from, as opposed to, we're doing this deal with you for a CD add-on potentially, and you can have this as part of that whole thing. That's not apparently how it happened. So I don't know if that makes it any more understandable why those games turned out, the way they did and everything, but it goes to show there's a few different kind of strands in that. But again, maybe that's just too much nuance or too much complexity that would have to get, sanded down for, an actual version in a dramatized version.
Mm.
Yeah, I think as well, you could probably do something on the rise and fall of Blizzard. Not that they've completely fallen, but I'm sure there's a lot of like juicy stuff in there, especially like Jason Schreier has his book coming out, Play Nice. I think there's a lot of stuff in there, probably a lot of dirt that could be made into something dramatic for sure. I feel like there's generally it's like if anytime something outrageous is done first is good to be dramatized, because you have that element of risk, or the people in it not knowing really if they're going to succeed or not. I mean, now it's like Blizzard makes a game, whoopity-doo, who cares? But when they were making World of Warcraft, nobody had ever done that before. Mm-hmm. So that adds an element of like high stakes to it. And people doing outrageous things in order to achieve their dream. You have that kind of thing. But I think there's lots of stuff out there that could be dramatized.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like there is no shortage of ridiculous shit in the gaming industry, and now I'm just stuff pops into my head. I don't know if it could sustain a whole movie, but maybe it could, because there was last year a movie about BlackBerry, the rise and fall of that company, and okay, BlackBerry, what about Nokia and the N-Gage? The ridiculous shit about the price reveal of the N-Gage. Like they had this woman come up on stage and remove her shirt, and $299 was written on her belly, and it's like, that's definitely, the lowest point in the movie. I'm sure, I can't believe Jay fucking went and did it, with this fucking stupid idea. And anyway, moments like that are kind of infamous, but that we tend to forget because, God knows we've got better things terrible. To think about.
Well, that's
and also we'd rather forget them.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I guess it's like you'd rather forget them, but if you do it right, it could become a sort of comedic aspect to some extent. Where it's just like, yes, look how absolutely ridiculous this environment was, how sort of risible and quaint.
These people thought that they were at the top of the world and they could do no wrong, and now look at them fall into the precipice just thanks to their own stupidity and hubris.
Yeah.
There's something very it's a compelling story.
I guess because I'm not I'm not seeing the Tetris movie, and I've also not seen the one about like Air Jordan or whatever. Like it's
the Last Dance.
No, I mean like the shoes. There's a movie about the actual sneakers.
Yeah.
The Air Jordan line, right? Like the
Air.
So like the point is like it's a thing, like they sort of like just make something about products, but the sort of recursive, product about product essentially sort of mill, but they generally have tended to be about like big successes, right? Like Tetris, Air Jordans, like these are huge successes. I'm just trying to think, are there any you can think of about bombs? Like, I mean, I guess there's stuff about bad movies, like movies that have done badly or are infamous. I can think of that, like, but, like product bombs, I don't know, like, are we going to get a movie about the new Coke? Or like,
or like a movie about the Virtual Boy?
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah. I mean, I guess
that would be interesting because that's a story I really don't know.
To some extent, yeah, I guess the thing that's beautiful about what AG's example of the Nintendo PlayStation thing is that it's both. Because it's a huge failure story for Nintendo, and then like the CDI partnership and all that you've got, and then of course the PlayStation is the birth of this huge product line which still has this enormous market position to this day. So you kind of get your cake and eat it there. But oftentimes it's going to be are you going to have like a sort of tragicomic tale of your Virtual Boy type of scenario, or are you going to have this is the which I'm assuming in marketing departments is much more likely to carry the day of this is the story of this amazingly successful thing that you've all heard of, even if you're not a direct like consumer of it or whatever.
Well, I think the biggest example there would be the fall of Sega. Right out of the hardware business.
Yeah. I mean, again, you've got just from what we do know, some of these like internal disputes and all that seemingly did go on, with the different branches of Sega and the disagreements about, what sort of approach to take and the timing of hardware releases and all this sort of that created some of the kind of lack of joined up strategic thinking, where you get your 32X and your Sega Saturn within a short period of time and all that kind of stuff. And the last heroic effort of the Dreamcast to try and salvage it, which is, sadly, cut down by the evil corporate megalith of Sony and its DVDs. It could work.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much the same with, after going through like the Atari 50th anniversary collection. I mean, the story of them, I mean, that could certainly be turned into a 2-hour movie with Atari, where, they start off and they're incredibly successful and they have hot tubs in their offices and everybody's smoking weed. And then they get bought by Warner Brothers and they put this incredibly square, I guess you could say, CEO over top of this organization, and he eventually just kind of kills it over time, slowly. So there'd be a lot of interesting stuff. I mean, I can tell you just from the anniversary collection, there's a lot of interesting stories. A lot of those videos are pretty hilarious, but also interesting just in terms of, kind of who was doing what when, who was really driving things but getting the credit, the internal struggles, all that kind of stuff was really interesting. And all just, again, like, it's the same kind of thing where those guys are doing this for the first time. It's a brand new industry. Nobody really knows like what the formula is. I mean, everybody knows now in video games, what the formula is for the most part. Back then, there was no formula. So, yeah. All right. I think that's going to wrap us up for the week. Does anybody have anything to plug?
I do not.
No, but I suppose I feel confident that James would be, kind of urging us just to say the email address, because he does say it a lot, doesn't he? It did that.
Right.
Doesn't everyone know it at this point?
I don't think I can machine gun it the way that James can. He just reel it off, 3 times, just very quickly.
I mean, it's RFN at NintendoWorldReport.com, RFN at NintendoWorldReport.com, RFN at NintendoWorldReport.com.
There you go.
RFN at NintendoWorldReport.com?
Yes.
You're correct. RFN at NintendoWorldReport.com. Yes, absolutely.
All right.
All right. So yes, send us email and just don't entertain. I'm not James. I don't get a kick out of the dumber your email, the more I appreciate it. I want incisive. I want thought-provoking questions. I think the ones we had this week were pretty good. Use those as a guideline.
But what does it say that some of them were months old and that we skipped over them?
It just says a lot of the time we have
evergreen.
We have 3 in a rundown, and we do too, because someone not pointing fingers won't shut up, and we have issues.
Some people respect other people's time and some don't. That's all I'm saying. All right. So, Greg.
Yes.
Our music.
So, this week, just a couple of days ago, Monolith Soft were celebrating their 25th anniversary as a company online now. So, of course, developers of the Xenoblade series, and they were acquired by Nintendo, and I think it was around about 2007, something like that, somewhere in the middle of the aughts. So they didn't start life that way. I think it was Namco, that they were kind of working for originally, but of course, they eventually, got acquired by Nintendo and have gone on to, craft the Xenoblade series and contribute to things like Breath of the Wild and Splatoon. And, we think of them as being a pretty significant part of Nintendo's stable of developers today. But of course, it all began 25 years ago, and they kind of commemorated this with a little animation of the protagonists from Xenoblade 3, Noah and Mio, doing their off-seeing kind of performance with the flutes and all that, and being surrounded by images of all the various games that they've been a part of in that quarter of a century. And so, the music that they used really is the most apt, right? No surprise there, that they would know what's apt for this occasion for their own company, which is like the closing music from the most recent, Xenoblade 3 Future Redeemed, DLC sort of campaign, because that very much is like, looking back at the series, and they even got the vocalist from the end music for Xenogears to come back, so that's even going outside the scope of Monolith history and just a kind of Takahashi history in general, with the kind of forebear of the Xenoblade series. So I can't use that, basically. They've done it. It's very nice. So I can't go there. So I have to then somehow, select some other nice bit of music from Monolith history. And as much as tempted, having seen the image of Ray from Disaster Day Crisis in that bit of video, alongside, various other things like Project Cross Zone and so forth. It will not be something from Disaster. I am going to go with something that I played earlier this year from Xenoblade 2, Torn of the Golden Country DLC, which is a field theme that's a little bit atypical, because it's kind of like it's the main field area in that game. There is another one which is like a remix of something from Xenoblade 2, but it's the main one. But it's not the typical kind of overworld music that we identify most with Xenoblade games. Like the Goa Plains in the first game, where it's really got this feeling of like it's very rich, it's very sort of big, but it's also quite joyous. It's like, even though there's always like some perpetual war or some world that's in terminal decline, it's like, no, it's a beautiful world. Go out and explore it. But
go forth and explore.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly the kind of what they're trying to convey. But in Torna, the Golden Country, the whole point is you're exploring somewhere that you know from the story of the main game is going to die. Like, the whole place is going to go down. So I guess wisely they thought, well, we can't really do that. It's got to be a bit more kind of bittersweet, and that is what you get. It really is. Obviously with overworld themes in Xenoblade games, they have day and night. So there's always a little bit of that element of, when the day theme kicks in, it's like sunrise, right? And this is really like, you could absolutely imagine this being set to some kind of nature documentary of like, here is a day in the life of this ecosystem. And, you know, it just starts with that one piano note of the sun coming up, and then we see it. We see this whole place with all the life and beautiful stuff in it, but it's just tinged with the sadness that it's all going to go. So I think really, really effective stuff. And just, you know, it's got some of that kind of quintessential Xenoblade kind of feel to it, but also it's kind of, you know, distinct, is special. There's nothing quite like it in the other games that I've played, I'd say. And so that
tinged with sadness, tinged with.
Just to be specific, it's Kingdom of Torna. That's what it's called, like, on the album. If you want to look that up.
Yeah, tinged with sadness, knowing that it's all going to go down, much like this podcast. So, ending on a very appropriate note. All right, Guy and Greg, thank you as always for being here. It was an absolute pleasure being your host on this episode 895. And we will see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Later.